Millionaire marries an overweight woman on a bet and gets shocked when. Nathaniel Blake had always been the kind of man people envied. Handsome, wealthy, and dripping with charisma, he moved through life with an air of superiority that few dared to challenge. His fortune was the result of shrewd investments and a long line of successful real estate deals, but his reputation wasn't without its blemishes. Many whispered about the ruthless way he conducted business, seizing opportunities without care for the lives disrupted in his wake. At a lavish charity gala in New York, Nathaniel's charm was on full display. Guests fawned over him, vying for a moment of his attention. Amid the swirling crowd of gowns and tuxedos, Nathaniel's longtime friend and occasional rival, Brandon Hart, approached with a devilish grin. "Enjoying your kingdom, your highness?" Brandon teased, raising his glass. Nathaniel smirked. Someone has to keep the peasants entertained. Their banter always teetered on the edge of playful and competitive, but tonight, Brandon seemed more provocative. Brandon began, swirling his drink, "For all your conquests, I don't think you've ever ventured outside your comfort zone. You only chase after perfection, slim, elegant, predictable." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "And why would I settle for anything less?" Brandon leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Because perfection is boring, my friend. How about a real challenge?" He nodded toward a woman standing confidently near the bar. She was striking, though not in the conventional sense. With a fuller figure and a wardrobe that favored bold colors and patterns, she exuded a magnetic confidence. Her laughter rang out as she chatted with the bartender, utterly unfazed by the opulence around her. "That's Valerie Scott," Brandon said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "She's not your usual type, but I bet you couldn't win her over." Nathaniel chuckled, brushing off the idea. "Please, Bren. I've won over tougher crowds." But Brandon wasn't done. "Let's make it interesting, then. A bet. Marry her and stay married for 6 months. If you succeed, I'll donate $500,000 to your foundation." Nathaniel paused, intrigued. A $500,000 donation would solidify his standing as a philanthropic hero, and the challenge of conquering someone like Valerie was too enticing to resist. "You're on," Nathaniel said, extending his hand. The deal was sealed with a handshake and a smirk. Valerie Scott was many things: fiercely independent, unapologetically herself, and no stranger to people underestimating her. She ran a successful boutique in Brooklyn and had built a loyal clientele with her keen eye for fashion and her ability to make everyone feel seen and celebrated. When Nathaniel Blake, the poster child for privilege, approached her that evening, she saw through his charm immediately. "Miss Scott," Nathaniel said, his tone smooth and rehearsed, "I couldn't help but notice you've been stealing the spotlight tonight." Valerie arched an eyebrow. "Funny, I thought that was your job." He laughed, unaccustomed to being challenged so quickly. "Touché. May I buy you a drink?" "I'm good, thanks," she replied, turning back to the bartender. "But nice try." For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt a flicker of uncertainty. Valerie wasn't like the women who usually flocked to him. She didn't care about his wealth or status, and that made her all the more intriguing. Over the next few days, Nathaniel made it his mission to win her over. He sent flowers to her shop, dropped by with expensive coffee, and even commissioned a custom gown from her boutique, claiming he needed advice on what to wear for an upcoming event. Valerie, amused but wary, decided to play along. "I'll agree to this little arrangement of yours," she finally said, "but on my terms. I don't play second fiddle to anyone, and I won't be some trophy on your arm." Nathaniel grinned, sensing victory. "Agreed. You'll find I'm quite good at keeping my promises." Valerie leaned in, her expression serious. "I hope so, Mr. Blake, because I have no patience for liars or cowards." The stage was set. What Nathaniel didn't know was that Valerie had her own reasons for agreeing to this unusual partnership, reasons that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the world he controlled. Nathaniel Blake was no stranger to strategy. As a self-made millionaire, every deal, every investment, and every partnership had been calculated to perfection. But Valerie Scott was proving to be his most enigmatic challenge yet. Unlike the corporate titans and socialites he was used to charming, Valerie lived in a world built on authenticity and resilience. Her boutique, nestled in the heart of Brooklyn, reflected her vibrant personality, a kaleidoscope of bold fabrics and daring designs, with a welcoming atmosphere that drew customers in like a moth to a flame. Nathaniel's frequent visits to her shop were becoming the talk of the neighborhood. Valerie, though amused, wasn't entirely fooled. She'd met men like Nathaniel before, men who assumed that money and charm could open any door. But she sensed there was more to his sudden interest, something he wasn't saying. One afternoon, as Nathaniel entered the boutique, Valerie greeted him with her usual blend of warmth and skepticism. "You must have the busiest schedule in Manhattan," she said, folding her arms. "Yet you've been spending an awful lot of time in Brooklyn lately." Nathaniel chuckled, feigning nonchalance. "What can I say? Your boutique has become my favorite escape from boardrooms and spreadsheets." Valerie smirked. "Huh? And what exactly are you escaping from?" For a moment, Nathaniel hesitated. He had always been quick on his feet, but Valerie's directness was disarming. He recovered quickly, flashing his signature smile. "Maybe I'm just escaping the monotony of predictability," he replied, his tone light. "Life's too short to stay in your comfort zone, don't you think?" Valerie tilted her head, studying him. "Comfort zones are overrated," she said, her voice softer now. "But that doesn't mean you should trust every escape route." The weight of her words lingered, but Nathaniel quickly shifted the conversation. He knew better than to let her see too much. After all, the bet he made with Brandon remained a secret, a ticking time bomb that could destroy everything if Valerie ever found out. Despite her growing suspicions, Valerie found herself enjoying Nathaniel's company. He was undeniably charming, but more than that, he seemed genuinely interested in her work. He asked thoughtful questions about her designs, even offering to connect her with high-profile clients in the fashion industry. Yet Valerie couldn't shake the feeling that his sudden fascination with her life was too good to be true. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was facing his own internal conflict. The bet, once a source of amusement, now felt like a burden. Every interaction with Valerie revealed layers of complexity he hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just a challenge to be conquered. She was a force of nature, intelligent, witty, and fiercely independent. For the first time in years, Nathaniel found himself questioning his motives. Brandon, ever the instigator, noticed the change in his friend. Over drinks one evening, he leaned in with a smirk. "Getting cold feet, Nate," he teased. "You're not falling for her, are you?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just playing the long game." Brandon laughed. "Sure you are. Just remember the clock is ticking. 6 months isn't as long as it sounds." Nathaniel nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The bet had started as a game, a way to prove his charm and win a hefty donation for his foundation. But now the stakes felt higher. Valerie wasn't just another mark. She was someone he genuinely admired. And the deeper he waded into this charade, the more he feared the inevitable fallout. Unbeknownst to Nathaniel, Valerie had her own reasons for entertaining this unlikely courtship. Years ago, her family had lost everything when a luxury development project displaced their small business. Her father had poured his life savings into that shop, only to watch it crumble under the weight of corporate greed. Though Valerie had rebuilt her life, the scars of that loss remained. And now, standing before her was Nathaniel Blake, the man whose name was on the papers that had sealed her family's fate. Valerie hadn't confronted him yet. She wanted to see how far he would go, what truths might slip through the cracks if she played her cards right. If Nathaniel thought he could waltz into her life and win her over with empty charm, he was sorely mistaken. As days turned into weeks, their interactions became a dance of guarded revelations and subtle power plays. Valerie remained firm in her independence, refusing to let Nathaniel's wealth dictate the terms of their relationship. And Nathaniel, though still bound by his secret bet, found himself drawn to her authenticity in ways he couldn't explain. The tension between them simmered, a delicate balance of mutual curiosity and unspoken truths. For now, both were content to navigate the uncharted waters of their partnership, each harboring secrets that could change everything. The initial phase of their partnership had been a careful dance, but as time went on, the stakes began to rise. Nathaniel's efforts to win Valerie over grew more elaborate. From exclusive dinner reservations at the city's most coveted restaurants to spontaneous weekend getaways in the Hamptons, he spared no expense. Yet, for all his grand gestures, Valerie remained steadfast, always appreciative but never swayed. One evening, Nathaniel decided to take a different approach. Instead of orchestrating another extravagant outing, he invited Valerie to a quiet dinner at his penthouse. He personally cooked, a fact that both surprised and intrigued her. "I didn't peg you as the cooking type," Valerie said as she took a seat at the marble kitchen island. Nathaniel smirked, flipping the salmon on the skillet. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Valerie. That works both ways, she replied, her tone light but laced with meaning. The evening was intimate and surprisingly relaxed. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. For the first time, Nathaniel opened up about his late father, a stern businessman who had taught him that success required sacrifice. My father used to say emotions were a liability, Nathaniel admitted, pouring them each a glass of wine. He believed that if you let people see your heart, they'd find a way to break it. Valerie studied him, her expression softening. Do you believe that? Nathaniel hesitated, then shook his head. Not anymore. For a moment, Valerie felt a pang of empathy. Despite his wealth and privilege, Nathaniel carried his own burdens. But she quickly reminded herself of her mission. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not yet. Meanwhile, Brandon grew impatient. He'd expected Nathaniel to charm Valerie effortlessly and win the bet within weeks. But as the weeks turned into months, Brandon began to suspect that his friend's feelings for Valerie were deeper than he let on. During a golf outing, Brandon confronted Nathaniel. You're getting too close, Nate, Brandon said, his tone serious. Remember, this is a bet, not a love story. Nathaniel sighed, adjusting his grip on the club. I know what it is. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're losing focus. Nathaniel's shot sailed down the fairway, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Brandon's words struck a nerve. He had begun to care for Valerie in ways he hadn't anticipated, and the weight of his secret was growing unbearable. The tension between Nathaniel and Valerie reached a boiling point one rainy night. After weeks of subtle power plays and unspoken truths, Valerie finally confronted him about his intentions. Why are you really here, Nathaniel? She asked, her voice steady but demanding. What do you want from me? Nathaniel froze, caught off guard by her directness. He searched for the right words, but the truth was too complicated to explain. Instead, he deflected. I thought we were past questioning each other's motives, he said, his tone defensive. Valerie shook her head. Don't do that. Don't dodge the question. For a moment, Nathaniel considered coming clean. He wanted to tell her everything, the bet, his initial intentions, and how much she had changed him. But fear held him back. If Valerie knew the truth, she would never forgive him. I'm here because I want to be, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Valerie studied him, her eyes searching for signs of deceit. She could sense there was more to his story, but for now she let it go. Then prove it, she said, stepping closer. Be honest with me, Nathaniel. No more games. Nathaniel nodded, silently vowing to find a way to come clean before it was too late. Unbeknownst to Nathaniel, Valerie was unraveling her own web of secrets. She had quietly begun investigating his business dealings, searching for proof of his involvement in her family's downfall. The more she uncovered, the more determined she became to hold him accountable. One evening, while reviewing old documents in her apartment, Valerie found the evidence she'd been searching for, a contract signed by Nathaniel that had authorized the sale of her family's land. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This was the man who had indirectly caused her father's death and her family's ruin. But instead of confronting him immediately, Valerie decided to bide her time. She needed to see how far Nathaniel was willing to go, how much he was willing to reveal about himself without being forced. The storm was brewing, and both Nathaniel and Valerie were standing on the edge of a precipice. Their secrets, their lies, and their unspoken truths were converging, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. As the 6-month mark of their unusual arrangement loomed closer, the stakes rose for both Nathaniel and Valerie. Neither of them could afford to falter, though their motivations were vastly different. While Nathaniel wrestled with guilt over the bet and his growing feelings, Valerie was building her own case, one that would hold him accountable for his past actions. Despite their internal struggles, life around them continued to unfold, bringing new players into the mix. One of these was Eleanor, Valerie's best friend and confidant. A sharp and perceptive woman, Eleanor had long been skeptical of Nathaniel's intentions. He's hiding something, Eleanor said one afternoon, as she and Valerie shared coffee in a boutique. Men like him don't change overnight. Valerie nodded, her face thoughtful. I know, but I need to see this through, Eleanor. I need to know why he's here and what he really wants. Eleanor hesitated, then leaned closer. Just promise me one thing. If it ever feels like you're losing control, walk away. Don't let him manipulate you. Valerie offered a small, reassuring smile. I promise. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's world was also becoming more complicated. His business partner, Robert Whitman, had grown suspicious of Nathaniel's recent behavior. Robert had always been the practical one, managing the logistical side of their real estate empire, while Nathaniel played the charming frontman. But Nathaniel's growing distraction and reluctance to engage in aggressive business tactics hadn't gone unnoticed. During a heated meeting at their office, Robert confronted Nathaniel. "Are you still committed to this company?" Robert demanded, his voice tense. "Because lately, it seems like your head's been elsewhere." Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm committed, Robert. I just have personal matters to sort out." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Personal matters? Since when do you let personal issues interfere with business?" Nathaniel didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Robert leaned back, studying him with narrowed eyes. "Whatever's going on, you'd better get it under control," Robert said finally. "We can't afford to lose focus, not now." Nathaniel nodded, but his thoughts were miles away. He knew Robert was right. His distraction was dangerous, not just for the business but for his carefully constructed facade. As tensions in their personal lives escalated, so did the complexity of Nathaniel and Valerie's relationship. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to maintain their respective charades. Small moments of vulnerability began to slip through the cracks. A shared laugh, a lingering glance, an unguarded confession. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, Valerie found herself lowering her defenses, if only for a moment. The city lights shimmered on the water, and a gentle breeze carried the sounds of distant laughter and music. "I used to come here with my dad," Valerie said quietly, her gaze distant. "Before everything fell apart." Nathaniel glanced at her, sensing the weight of her words. "He must have been a good man." "He was," Valerie said, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "He believed in people, in community. That's why losing the shop was so hard. It wasn't just a business, it was his life's work." Nathaniel felt a pang of guilt, knowing his actions had played a role in her family's loss. He wanted to tell her the truth, to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he reached for her hand, offering silent comfort. Valerie allowed herself to hold his hand for a moment before gently pulling away. The connection between them was undeniable, but the unresolved tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. As the days passed, both Nathaniel and Valerie found themselves on edge, each waiting for the other to make a move. Valerie's investigation was nearing its conclusion, and she knew the time to confront Nathaniel was fast approaching. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was grappling with the realization that he couldn't go through with a bet without destroying the one person who had made him question everything. The climax of their deception came at a gala hosted by Nathaniel's foundation. Valerie attended as his guest, the picture of elegance and confidence. But beneath her poised exterior, she was bracing for the confrontation she knew would come. Brandon was also at the gala, watching the couple with a mix of amusement and curiosity. As he approached Nathaniel, his grin widened. "Looks like you've won her over," Brandon said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd last this long." Nathaniel's smile was tight. "The game isn't over yet." Brandon chuckled, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath Nathaniel's calm facade. "Well, here's to your final act." Unbeknownst to either man, Valerie had overheard their exchange. Her heart pounded as she pieced together the truth. Nathaniel's interest in her had been part of a bet. Fury and betrayal surged through her, but she forced herself to remain composed. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. She needed to confront Nathaniel when she had the upper hand. The night was far from over, and the storm brewing between them was about to reach its breaking point. The gala had been a whirlwind of glamour and grandeur, but for Valerie, it marked the beginning of the end. The revelation of Nathaniel's bet struck her like a thunderclap, unraveling the fragile trust they had built. She spent the rest of the evening playing her part, smiling for the cameras and engaging in polite conversation, all while silently plotting her next move. Nathaniel, oblivious to Valerie's discovery, was preoccupied with his internal conflict. His feelings for her had grown beyond anything he had anticipated, and the weight of his deception was becoming unbearable. As the night drew to a close, he knew he couldn't keep up the charade much longer. 2 weeks later, Nathaniel surprised Valerie with a proposal. He rented out a private rooftop garden, complete with soft candlelight and a live string quartet. Everything about the evening was meticulously planned to be unforgettable. As they stood under the stars, Nathaniel took her hand, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Valerie," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to truly connect with someone, and I don't want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Valerie was silent, her heart pounding. She knew this proposal was part of the bet, but she also saw the genuine emotion in Nathaniel's eyes. Torn between her mission and the man she was beginning to care for, she made a decision that would set the stage for their ultimate confrontation. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll marry you." Nathaniel's face lit up with relief and joy, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. But as they celebrated, Valerie silently vowed that their marriage would not be the end of her quest for justice. The wedding was a grand affair, held at a historic estate overlooking the Hudson River. Friends, family, and high-profile guests filled the venue, marveling at the unlikely couple. Valerie, radiant in a custom gown from her boutique, walked down the aisle with an air of quiet determination. Nathaniel, dashing in his tailored suit, looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Despite the outward perfection of the day, tension simmered beneath the surface. Valerie's best friend Eleanor watched from the front row, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She knew Valerie was playing a dangerous game, and she could only hope her friend would emerge unscathed. As they exchanged vows, Nathaniel's voice trembled with sincerity. "I promise to stand by your side, to support your dreams, and to earn your trust every day for the rest of my life." Valerie's response was equally heartfelt, but her words carried a double meaning. "And I promise to hold you accountable, to challenge you to be the best version of yourself, and to never settle for anything less than the truth." Their vows sealed, they shared a kiss that drew applause from the guests. But for Valerie, it was a bittersweet moment. She had married the man responsible for her family's suffering, and while she felt a growing affection for him, she couldn't forget the pain he had caused. The turning point came during their honeymoon. Nathaniel had planned a luxurious getaway to the Maldives, complete with overwater villas and private excursions. The idyllic setting was meant to offer them a chance to relax and grow closer, but Valerie had other plans. One evening, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset, Valerie decided it was time to confront Nathaniel. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," she said, her tone casual but pointed. "Why did you really choose me?" Nathaniel, caught off guard, hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I mean, out of all the women you could have been with, why me? I don't exactly fit your usual type." Nathaniel looked away, guilt flickering across his face. "Because you're different. You're real." Valerie nodded slowly, her suspicions confirmed. "And what about the bet?" she asked, her voice sharp. Nathaniel's head snapped back toward her, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you and Brandon at the gala," Valerie said, her voice steady. "This whole thing was a game to you, wasn't it? A bet to see if you could win me over." Nathaniel's face fell, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Valerie's expression hardened. "I trusted you, Nathaniel," she continued. "But now I see I was just another conquest, another pawn in your twisted game." "Valerie, it's not like that," Nathaniel said, his voice pleading. "It started as a bet, yes, but everything changed. You changed me." Valerie stood, her eyes blazing with a mix of hurt and anger. "You don't get to play the victim here. You lied to me, and you manipulated me. How can I ever believe anything you say?" Nathaniel rose to his feet, desperation etched across his face. "I love you, Valerie. I know I've made mistakes, but I swear my feelings for you are real." Valerie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Love isn't built on lies, Nathaniel. If you truly want to fix this, you'll have to prove it." With that, she walked away, leaving Nathaniel standing alone under the fading light of the sunset, his heart heavy with regret. The return from their honeymoon was anything but blissful. Valerie and Nathaniel barely spoke during the flight, their silence heavy with unspoken words. Nathaniel's attempts at conversation were met with curt responses or averted gazes. Valerie's mind raced with conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, and a lingering affection that she desperately tried to suppress. Back in New York, Valerie moved back into her apartment, refusing Nathaniel's offers to stay at his penthouse. She needed space to think, to process the whirlwind of events that had turned her life upside down. Meanwhile, Nathaniel found himself in uncharted territory. For the first time, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions without the safety net of charm or wealth to shield him. One evening, Brandon showed up unannounced in Nathaniel's penthouse, his expression smug. "Well, I heard the honeymoon didn't quite go as planned," Brandon said, pouring himself a drink. "Care to share what happened?" Nathaniel glared at him, his patience wearing thin. She knows about the bet, he said flatly. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Oh, and how did she find out? She overheard us at the gala, Nathaniel replied, his voice filled with frustration. She confronted me, and now she won't even look at me. Brandon shrugged, clearly unfazed. It's just a bet, Nate. She'll get over it. Nathaniel slammed his glass on the table, the sound echoing through the room. It wasn't just a bet, he shouted. It stopped being a game the moment I fell in love with her. Brandon's expression shifted, a rare flicker of seriousness crossing his face. You really mean that, don't you? Nathaniel nodded, his shoulders slumping. For the first time in my life, I care about someone more than myself. And I've ruined it. Brandon sighed, setting his drink down. Then you'd better find a way to fix it. Because women like Valerie don't come around often, and you won't get a second chance. While Nathaniel grappled with his guilt, Valerie confided in Eleanor. Over cups of coffee in Valerie's cozy living room, the two friends dissected the situation. I knew he was hiding something, Valerie said, her voice weary, but I never imagined it would be this. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. You've always been strong, Val, but you don't have to go through this alone. What are you going to do? Valerie sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back, but another part of me sees how much he's changed. I just don't know if I can trust him again. Eleanor reached out, placing a comforting hand on Valerie's arm. Trust takes time, and it's not something you owe him. If he truly loves you, he'll work to earn it. Valerie nodded, her resolve strengthening. You're right. If he wants a future with me, he'll have to prove it. Days turned into weeks, and Nathaniel threw himself into making amends. He started small, sending Valerie handwritten letters apologizing for his actions and expressing his regret. He also made quiet, meaningful changes in his professional life, revisiting past deals to see where he could make reparations. One afternoon, Valerie received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from Nathaniel, along with a portfolio detailing a project he had been working on. He had purchased a block of land in Brooklyn with plans to develop it into affordable housing and small business spaces, a direct response to the kind of displacement her family had suffered. The letter read, Valerie, I know I can't undo the pain I've caused, but I want to start making things right. This project is just the beginning. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be better. You deserve nothing less. Nathaniel. Valerie's heart softened as she read the letter, but she remained cautious. Actions spoke louder than words, and she needed to see if Nathaniel's efforts would hold up over time. One evening, Nathaniel showed up at Valerie's boutique, unannounced but visibly nervous. He held a bouquet of her favorite flowers, simple yet elegant, just like her. Can we talk? He asked, his voice almost pleading. Valerie crossed her arms but nodded, gesturing for him to come in. They sat in the quiet of the boutique, surrounded by the vibrant colors of Valerie's designs. I know I've hurt you, Nathaniel began, his voice steady. And I know it'll take more than words to fix that. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. Valerie studied him, her expression unreadable. You've made promises before, Nathaniel. How do I know this time will be different? Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes filled with sincerity. Because this time, it's not about winning or proving something. It's about you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you let me. For the first time in weeks, Valerie saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen for, the man who, despite his flaws, was trying to be better. But trust wasn't something she could give lightly. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said softly, but I'm willing to see if you can change. Nathaniel nodded, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. That's all I could ask for. Nathaniel took Valerie's words to heart, throwing himself into the difficult work of rebuilding trust. He knew that grand gestures wouldn't be enough this time. What mattered was consistency, humility, and a willingness to confront his past mistakes. One of his first steps was reaching out to the families and small business owners his previous real estate deals had affected. He listened to their stories, many of which mirrored Valerie's own experience. For each case, Nathaniel sought tangible ways to provide restitution, whether through financial support, new business opportunities, or simply offering a heartfelt apology. Meanwhile, Valerie watched his transformation with cautious optimism. Though she hadn't fully forgiven him, she couldn't deny the sincerity behind his efforts. He wasn't just making amends for her. He was actively trying to become a better man. Their interactions became more frequent but remained guarded. Nathaniel often visited her boutique, always respectful of her boundaries. He would sit quietly, observing her work and occasionally offering input on new designs. Though their conversations were brief, they carried a sense of warmth and understanding that had been missing since the fallout. One evening, Valerie invited Nathaniel to join her at a community event, a fundraiser for local businesses in Brooklyn. It was a small but significant step, a chance for him to prove his commitment in a public setting. As they mingled with the crowd, Valerie introduced Nathaniel to several of the attendees, many of whom were skeptical of his presence. But Nathaniel surprised everyone by engaging in earnest conversations, openly acknowledging his past mistakes and discussing his plans to support the community. By the end of the night, Valerie couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. Nathaniel was no longer the man who hid behind charm and wealth. He was standing on his own, embracing accountability. Their relationship continued to evolve, marked by small yet meaningful milestones. One afternoon, as they walked through a neighborhood park, Nathaniel turned to Valerie, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. "About accountability, trust, and earning a second chance. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I want you to know that every decision I make from now on is with you in mind." Valerie looked at him, her eyes soft but resolute. "It's not just about making decisions with me in mind, Nathaniel. It's about staying true to the values you're trying to build." Nathaniel nodded, a quiet determination in his gaze. "Then I'll keep building, one step at a time." As the weeks turned into months, Valerie gradually let down her guard. She saw in Nathaniel not just a man seeking redemption, but someone who was genuinely changing for the better. Their bond grew stronger, rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to personal growth. One evening, as they sat together in the boutique after hours, Valerie finally spoke the words Nathaniel had been longing to hear. "I'm ready to forgive you," she said, her voice steady. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We move forward together, but we keep learning from our past." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his heart full. "Together," he repeated. For the first time in a long while, both felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it, side by side. As their relationship deepened, the pressure from external forces began to mount. Brandon, once an instigator of the bet, was growing uneasy. He saw how serious Nathaniel had become and feared the implications for their friendship and business partnership. Brandon confronted Nathaniel at their office one afternoon, his tone sharp. "You've changed, Nate, and not in a good way. This obsession with Valerie is clouding your judgment." Nathaniel remained calm. "It's not an obsession, Brandon. I'm building something real, something that matters." Brandon scoffed. "You think that's what she wants? She's playing you just as much as you played her." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe she was at first, but I don't care. What we have now is real, and I won't let your cynicism ruin it." Brandon leaned in, his voice low. "You're risking everything for her. If this goes south, don't expect me to clean up the mess." Nathaniel stood firm. "I don't need you to. I've made my choice." Meanwhile, Valerie faced her own pressures. Eleanor remained supportive, but couldn't ignore the risks. "Are you sure about this, Val?" Eleanor asked one evening as they closed up the boutique. "Nathaniel's trying, but people like him don't change overnight." Valerie sighed. "I know, but I see the effort he's making. He's not the same man who made that bet." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself. Love is powerful, but it can't erase everything." Valerie smiled softly. "I promise." The tension came to a head during a gala celebrating the launch of Nathaniel's community housing project. The event was a culmination of months of hard work, and Nathaniel had spared no expense in making it a success. As Valerie mingled with guests, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The project was a tangible symbol of Nathaniel's transformation, and she hoped it would silence his critics. But as the evening wore on, an undercurrent of unease settled over her. Toward the end of the night, Brandon approached her, his smile more condescending than genuine. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" he said, sipping his drink. "Nathaniel's really outdone himself." Valerie's expression remained neutral. "He's worked hard to make this happen." Brandon chuckled. "Sure, but don't let the glitz fool you. Nate's still the same man who made that bet." Valerie's heart clenched, but she maintained her composure. "That's in the past." Brandon's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Is it?" Because the way I see it, this whole show is just another game to him. Before Valerie could respond, Nathaniel appeared at her side, his gaze hard. That's enough, Brandon. Brandon raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Nate. Just having a friendly chat. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You've made your point. Now leave her alone. Brandon smirked but complied, disappearing into the crowd. Nathaniel turned to Valerie, his expression softening. Are you okay? Valerie nodded, though her mind raced. I'm fine. Let's just focus on tonight. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. Together. But as the evening drew to a close, both knew the peace they had fought so hard for was on the brink of unraveling. The gala was meant to be a celebration, but for Valerie, it was a test. She had known about the bet for weeks, ever since overhearing Nathaniel and Brandon at the previous event. She had chosen not to confront Nathaniel immediately, wanting to see if his actions would align with the man he claimed to be. Now, standing among a crowd of New York's elite, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Nathaniel was in his element, addressing the audience with confidence as he unveiled his latest community housing project. Valerie watched him from the edge of the room, her heart heavy. Despite everything, she had grown to love him. But the bet, the secret that had poisoned their relationship from the start, still loomed between them. Just as Nathaniel wrapped up his speech, Brandon stepped forward, taking the microphone with a self-satisfied grin. Valerie's chest tightened. She had hoped he wouldn't dare, but Brandon was never one to miss an opportunity for drama. Before we applaud Nathaniel's generosity, Brandon said smoothly, let's talk about what really brought him and Valerie together. The room fell silent, all eyes shifting to Valerie. She straightened her posture, refusing to show weakness, even as her heart raced. It all started with a little wager, Brandon continued. Nathaniel bet he could charm anyone, even someone who didn't fit his usual preferences. And who better than Valerie? 6 months, he said. Just 6 months to prove his point. The crowd gasped, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Valerie's stomach twisted, not because she was hearing this for the first time, but because she hated that it was now public. The humiliation wasn't in the revelation itself, she had prepared for that, but in the pitying stares and whispers that followed. Nathaniel's face drained of color. He snatched the microphone from Brandon, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Yes, there was a bet, but it stopped being about that long ago. What began as a terrible mistake turned into the most important relationship of my life. He turned to the crowd, his eyes searching for Valerie. Valerie knew about the bet, and despite my lies, she gave me a chance to prove myself. Every action I've taken since then has been to show her, and myself, that I'm more than the man who made that foolish wager. The room went silent, all attention on Valerie. She stepped forward, her face calm but her eyes blazing. You're right, Nathaniel. I knew about the bet, she said, her voice clear and strong. And I stayed because I saw glimpses of the man you could be. But tonight, hearing it from Brandon, watching you scramble to save face, it reminded me of why I doubted you in the first place. Nathaniel took a step closer, his voice filled with desperation. Valerie, I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. Valerie held up a hand, stopping him. Intentions only go so far, Nathaniel. Trust isn't built on grand speeches or promises. It's built on consistency, on showing up every day with honesty and integrity. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the couple faced each other. Nathaniel's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. You're right. I've spent months trying to make up for one lie, but I see now that it's not enough. I can't undo what I've done, but I can spend the rest of my life proving to you, and to myself, that I'm worthy of your trust. Valerie's gaze faltered for a moment. She had prepared herself to walk away, but the sincerity in Nathaniel's voice made her hesitate. If you're serious about this, it won't be easy. No more shortcuts, no more hiding behind your wealth. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes. I've already started rebuilding from the ground up, and I'll keep doing it with or without you. But I hope it's with you. The tension in the room was palpable, the guests hanging on Valerie's next words. Finally, she nodded, her expression softening. One chance, Nathaniel. Don't waste it. Relief washed over Nathaniel's face, and for the first time that night, a small smile broke through. I won't. The room erupted into applause, but for Nathaniel and Valerie, the noise faded into the background. They stood together, knowing the road ahead would be difficult but feeling, for the first time, that they were on the same path. The weeks following the gala were a delicate balancing act for both Nathaniel and Valerie. They agreed to take things one step at a time, rebuilding their relationship slowly, without the weight of public scrutiny. Despite the chaos that Brandon's revelation had caused, it also served as a turning point, forcing both of them to confront their deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Nathaniel kept his promise to Valerie. He continued his work with the community, dedicating himself fully to projects that supported small businesses and affordable housing. Each new initiative was another step toward earning back Valerie's trust, though he never once pressured her to forgive him. Valerie, meanwhile, found herself grappling with her own doubts. Despite her lingering reservations, she couldn't ignore the changes she saw in Nathaniel. He was no longer the arrogant millionaire she had met at the gala months ago. He was a man willing to confront his past and fight for a better future. One evening, as they walked through the now thriving neighborhood that housed Nathaniel's latest project, Valerie stopped in front of a small cafe. The warm glow of the interior lights spilled onto the sidewalk, and she turned to Nathaniel. "This place used to be a run-down deli," she said, her voice filled with quiet. "Now it's a community hub." Nathaniel smiled, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and humility. "It's just the beginning. There's still a lot of work to be done." Valerie nodded, her gaze softening. "You've come a long way." "So have we," Nathaniel replied, taking her hand gently. "And I don't want to lose what we've built." Valerie squeezed his hand, her heart finally ready to let go of the last remnants of doubt. "Neither do I." In that moment, they both knew their journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. A year later, Nathaniel and Valerie stood on the steps of their newly opened community center, a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. The sun cast a warm glow over the bustling street, where families and small business owners gathered to celebrate the center's grand opening. Valerie, now a recognized advocate for small businesses, smiled as she watched children playing in the nearby park. Nathaniel stood beside her, his arm around her waist, a content expression on his face. As the crowd cheered, Nathaniel leaned in and whispered, "We did this. Together." Valerie nodded, her heart full. And it's only the beginning. Their journey had been marked by trials and revelations, but in the end, they had found something far more valuable than they ever imagined. A love built on trust, growth, and the promise of a brighter future.